My name is Bruno Bianchi Sarcone. I run Spainguru.es, and this is the Spanish Taxes Overview 2025 free webinar from Spainguru. A little bit about Spainguru. Our objective is facilitating the relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014, and you can see that we're receiving good reviews out there, so you are in pretty good hands. You can use Spainguru for absolutely free. It is a fantastic tool, not only my opinion, but apparently the opinion of others as well. You can join the weekly newsletter that I send every Monday morning, 10:15 CET, where I feature the top discussions of the week in social media, blog posts, feature the most watched video on YouTube, Spainguru's channel that you can also watch for free, where I have more than 900 videos. I publish almost one video per day, and blog posts with more than 1,700 articles that you can read, especially about taxes and immigrations. And of course, joining Facebook groups by Spainguru with an aggregated total of 150,000 members, with general immigration groups and expat groups and moving to Spain groups, but also dedicated groups to Spanish non-lucrative visa or retirement visa, probably the biggest group out there, and Spanish digital nomad visa as well. So yeah, many groups that you can join today, all this for absolutely free, and you can opt out anytime. But if you also want professional help, I have personally vetted my partners who I have been recommending, most of them for several years with stellar reviews. You can find immigration experts, tax advisors, financial planners, and if you're applying for visas or residence, well, compliant health insurances, medical certificates, strong translations, apostille services, and so many more services, auxiliary services as well, like bank accounts, money transfer services, property rentals, all that you can find on Spainguru.es. So it takes you a few minutes just to look at Spainguru.es and see what you can find there. I'm sure you're going to find interesting things. And of course, a lot of discounts that I have negotiated with my partners as well. Disclaimer about this webinar: this presentation is for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or tax advice. Consult with a qualified tax advisor or legal professional for personalized guidance. I'm not a tax advisor. You can find recommended tax advisors on Spainguru.es, and Spainguru is not responsible for any errors or outcomes from using this information. Such a big and long disclaimer. You will probably ask yourself, what am I going to get out of this webinar? Well, we have a few objectives. First, gain an overview of Spanish taxes, understand the key tax categories in Spain, and learn the basic principles of taxation in Spain. And prepare yourself for informed conversations with tax advisors so you can engage more effectively with those professionals, speak their language, yes, and ask more precise and informed questions. Third, clarify the role of professional tax advice. So it's important, I think, this introductory webinar, so you understand that it just provides general information and it will never replace personalized tax advice. And I underline personalized because it's important that you recognize how individual circumstances can significantly impact your tax liabilities. And last and not least, identify key considerations for expats. Learn about potential tax implications for, and the focus is on US and UK nationals, but not only them. I think that you are from anywhere else in the world, 99% of the content of this webinar will apply to you as well. And be aware of compliance requirements and deadlines to avoid potential penalties. So all those things, I hope you get out from this webinar today. Excuse me. Let's talk about tax residency. How do you establish tax residency in Spain? The most important condition, if you spend more than 183 days in the country within a calendar year. So every 1st of January, the tax year resets to 0. Yes. Those 183 days plus in Spain count regardless if they are consecutive or not. They count regardless of your immigration status. For example, you spend days as tourist at the beginning of the year, and then in the second half of the year, you arrive under a visa, for example, a non-lucrative visa or digital nomad visa. You have to count all physical presence in Spain during the calendar year that ends on December 31st, right? So if you arrive after July 2nd, there's only 182 days left in the calendar year. Therefore, you can, if you haven't been before during that calendar year in Spain, you can spend all the rest of the year without becoming a Spanish tax resident. However, there are 2 other conditions that in case you spend less than that period of time, but if you comply with any of these other 2 conditions, you could also be deemed to be a tax resident in Spain by the Spanish tax authorities. The second condition is if your main economic activity is in Spain, okay? And the third condition is if you have your main center of interest in Spain, also known as if you have family living, your spouse, your children living in Spain, potentially you could also be considered a tax resident in Spain. So it's important that you verify your travel records and you count every physical presence in Spain. And in case there are, let's say, if you could be considered to be a tax resident by two different countries, for example, then you should refer to double taxation treaties for guidance on tiebreaker rules, because sometimes there are conflicts and sometimes you could be considered to be tax resident in two countries at the same time. Now, what are the consequences of being a tax resident in Spain? The most important, you will be subject to taxation on your worldwide income and potentially on the net value of your assets. This is for wealth tax and solidarity tax in Spain. If you're a non-tax resident, you could be liable only for your income and assets sourced from or located in Spain. Talking about non-residents, you have two kinds of non-residents: EU passport holders or EEA passport holders. Those are associated countries. They have, as you can see, lower tax rates for the different types of incomes, usually at 19%. If you're a non-EU passport holder, non-resident in Spain, then there is a flat rate of 24%, for example, for employment income, or for example, for rental income. There you have the different tax rates. Now, coming back to tax residents, you have different tax systems or regimes and obligations in Spain. You have general tax regime that includes personal income tax or IRPF, which is impuesto sobre la renta de las personas físicas. You have wealth tax, impuesto sobre el patrimonio, which is the regional tax on net value of your assets. Then you have the solidarity tax, which is the national wealth tax. And then you have the 720 informative form, where you declare your overseas assets. Then you have a special tax regime, which is also called the Beckham Law. The eligibility for the special tax regime, 99% of the cases, is if you relocate to Spain working for a company from abroad. Okay, it is very, very strange, let's say, or unusual that a contractor or a 1099 freelancer would be eligible for this special tax regime. Now, what are the pros and cons of this special tax regime, the Beckham Law? Most famous one, you would pay a 24% flat rate that will only apply for the income sourced in Spain. You wouldn't pay Spanish income tax on your worldwide income. For example, foreign rental income, dividends, or salaries earned outside of Spain. You will not be required to submit your 720 form for the overseas assets declaration or pay wealth tax. The cons of the Beckham Law. This is something that most tax advisors would say, is that it is not very advantageous to apply for the special tax regime if you are making less than 55,000 euros, because the savings and the savings are minimal below this threshold, and there are additional administrative burdens that may outweigh the benefits of this special tax regime. You will not have family deductions or allowances, and so on and so on. So it is something that you need to study on an individual basis if it's good for you or not, and of course, if you're eligible for it. Now, let's talk about the different obligations that you have. The first tax obligation is the overseas assets reporting in the 720 form. You will declare your assets and rights held abroad in different categories. For example, bank accounts, investments, real estate, cryptocurrencies now with the 721 form. And there is a threshold for each of these categories. For example, bank accounts over 50,000 euros. So, for example, if you have 10 bank accounts with 5,000 euros outside of Spain, those 10 bank accounts will add up until 50,000 euros. Therefore, the full category of bank accounts is 50,000 euros, and you have to declare those 10 bank accounts in the 720 form. Okay, there is a first-year requirement. Once you become a tax resident in Spain, you will have to do a full disclosure of your overseas assets, which the Spanish tax authorities will look at, thinking of the wealth tax, okay, and or potentially the solidarity tax. And depending on the type of assets that you declare, potentially they will deduct that you will be also maybe generating some sort of income, right? So this is something that you do the first year in which you become a Spanish tax resident, and then subsequent years you will have to file the 720 form only if the net value of those assets or rights held abroad vary in 20,000 euros, or if you close certain assets categories. Now, the deadline for submitting the 720 form is March 31st, and you do it on the next year for the previous year. So, for example, in 2025, March 31st, you showed or you submitted the 720 form for assets held abroad and their value as of December 31st, 2024. Now, the second tax obligation is the income tax filing or personal income tax, IRPF. You have different types of taxable incomes. You have ordinary income or investment income with different tax rates. Ordinary income are subjective to progressive tax rates that go from 19% to 47%. This type of income or ordinary income, you will find salaries, rental income, and business earnings. Under investment income, you will find dividends, interest, capital gains tax. These are taxed at lower rates that go from 19% to 30%. Actually, in January 2025, the highest threshold went up to 30%. The deadline for submitting the income tax is June 30th. And again, you will submit on June 30th, 2025, your income tax for the tax year of 2024. You will normally begin to prepare it on April 1st if you work with a gestor or with a tax advisor. However, if you're autónomo or contractor in Spain, you will have to do quarterly filings for the income tax, and you will also have to make payments for income tax on a quarterly basis as well. And you will also have to pay your VAT as well as an autónomo. For US citizens, as you know, if you're a US passport holder, you still have to file and potentially pay taxes in the US, even if you don't live there, even if you're not a tax resident in the US. And April 15th is the deadline to submit your income tax for in the US. If you live abroad, overseas, you have an automatic extension until June 15th, right? And normally, what you have to do is to file your taxes in Spain before June 15th, and with the payment of your taxes in Spain, you will credit that payment towards your taxes in the US. Therefore, normally you will not have to pay taxes in the US, just filing. You can also request another extension as well. Later on, you will have to pay some interests, but if you want to file an extension after June 15th, you can also do it. And as according to the double taxation treaty between the US and Spain, and in general with every double taxation treaty, you normally need to file taxes first where you're a tax resident and then in other jurisdictions. Common asked question. Is it true I will pay 45% tax if I am making 100,000 euros? You can see there on the right table that there are different progressive tax brackets. As we mentioned, the income tax goes from 19% to 47%. If you look on the fifth row on the right table, you will see that income between 60,000 euros and 300,000 euros pay 45% tax. But is it really that effective tax rate if you have a taxable income of 100,000 euros, 45%? The answer is no. This is not how you calculate your effective tax rate using the progressive brackets. The way you do it is that you will have to pay a sort of average or median, okay? Because you will pay 19% income tax on your first 12,450 euros of income. Then you will pay 24% of tax for the following 7,500 euros that you make. And then you will pay 30% for the following 15,000 euros. If you understand me, then you have there on the left the calculation for 100,000 euros. This is, of course, for information purposes only. It's a ballpark figure without allowances or deductions, just for the purpose of understanding how the tax brackets work. So the effective tax rate for 100K round taxable income euros is 36%. And here you can see for different taxable incomes, the effective tax rates in Spain without allowances or deductions, ballpark figures. If you're making 30,000 euros, you will pay an effective tax rate of 24%, for 40K, 26%, for 50K, 29%. And as you can see, it goes up progressively. And this is why they talk about them as progressive tax brackets. Now, the third tax obligation is wealth tax and solidarity taxes. The wealth tax, or Impuesto sobre el Patrimonio, is a regional tax. There are 17 regions in Spain, and each region has the authority to set the conditions for how to get this tax. It is based on your net wealth as of December 31st, right? So as we mentioned, if you have to pay your wealth tax in 2025, you will pay it for the net value of your assets of December 31st, 2024. Each region has different thresholds in which this tax kicks in. For example, Catalonia is only 500,000 euros. You have a 500,000 euros allowance in your net wealth. Other regions, it goes up. Some regions like Madrid, for example, the threshold goes up to 3 million for the wealth tax, equalizing the threshold for the solidarity tax. Therefore, in Madrid, in practical terms, you don't have a wealth tax. Okay, in Andalusia, the threshold is lower, but you have a 100% rebate on the wealth tax. Therefore, you have to file it, but you will not pay a thing. Okay, so those two regions, Madrid and Andalusia, are the most favorable ones for the for the wealth tax. There's also something called the 60% rule, which is quite complex to explain, but something that has to stay in your mind is that especially designed for people who have very high value of assets, but very low income. Okay, so there is always a limit on your wealth tax if your income is very low. Okay, so this is something that you need to apply if that is your case, because it can reduce your wealth tax to up to 80%. Now, the deadline for filing the wealth tax is June 30th. And again, the preparation starts usually on April 1st. Let's talk about the solidarity tax, which is impuesto temporal, temporary. But of course, as you probably know, there's nothing temporary in terms of taxes anywhere in the world. This was supposed to be a temporary tax, but it never went away. Impuesto temporal de solidaridad de las grandes fortunas. And it is a national wealth tax that the central government decided to apply because they weren't happy about certain regions not applying the wealth tax. But the threshold in which this tax kicks in is 3 million with the allowances, okay? Depending on the, with certain allowances, right? So it is a much higher threshold, and it works more or less the same way as the wealth tax, but the difference is it is a national wealth tax that regardless on where you move in Spain, you could potentially be liable for this tax. And the deadline is 1 month after the 1 month after the wealth tax, because whatever you have paid as a wealth tax, I understand you can credit it towards what you pay for the solidarity tax. And here's a calculation on how the wealth tax would be calculated for someone living in Catalonia. For example, we mentioned that Catalonia had a very low threshold of only 500,000 euros. So all the net value of your assets after 500,000 euros would be liable for a wealth tax. There's also an allowance. If you're an owner of a property in Spain, you can deduct up to 300,000 euros. Of course, your property has to be valued at least that to deduct that. So imagine that you are owner of a property of 300,000 euros. You live in Catalonia, so you add those allowance and deductions, you can deduct 800,000 euros of your taxable amount. Imagine that your net value of your assets is 1 million euros. This is the first line in this table. You deduct 800,000 euros, your taxable wealth would be 200,000 euros. You apply the progressive tax brackets, and you will have to pay a little bit less than 500 euros for that year. If your net worth is €1.5 million, €1.5 million, your taxable wealth will be 700,000 euros, and you will pay little over 3,000 euros. For 2 million, you will pay 1,000 euros. For 2.5 million, you would pay 14,000 euros, round numbers. Remember that there is a Q&A session at the end after this presentation. You can ask your questions anytime in the chat box. Make sure to add a question mark at the end so it's easy for me to see. And if you think the information I'm sharing with you today is good and it's helpful, make sure to leave a review on Trustpilot. There's a green bar on top with a red button that will redirect you to Trustpilot. It only takes 5 seconds of your time to do it, and it will make me extremely happy. Thank you so much. Let's continue. Now let's talk a little bit about digital nomads. I have 3 quick slides about digital nomads. What about taxes for digital nomads in Spain? So there are different considerations depending if you move as a worker, as an employee of a company, or if you move as a contractor or as a freelancer or autónomo. Yes. So if you move as an employee, you will have to do Social Security contributions, okay? So the payments are made in Spain unless the employer lacks a local presence, in which case your employer must register for Spanish Social Security or provide a certificate of coverage, also called A1. At the moment, really, the United Kingdom A1 is accepted by Spanish authorities and lasts 1 year without further renewal. 1 year or 2 years, depends, okay? Lately also, it has been accepted the United States certificate of coverage, but it is not very clear because there are some denials, there are some approvals. It is not very clear what's happening. It's not very consistent how the immigration authorities are looking at it. Beckham law benefits are available only to employees, not to self-employed. Therefore, if you're moving as an employee and you haven't lived in Spain for the last 5 years, potentially you're eligible for the special tax regime, also called the Beckham law. Now, if you move to Spain as a contractor, as an autónomo, yes, which is the most common way to move to Spain, so basically everyone else except United Kingdom workers, contractors are not considered employees, and they will have to contribute to the Spanish Social Security system. They will be responsible for managing their own tax filings and, of course, the SS payments. Normally, as we said, except very extreme exceptions, Beckham law will not apply to contractors, okay? And if you become an autónomo in Spain, you will have to file your taxes in Spain on a quarterly basis. Now, depending on when you arrive to Spain in the year, you potentially have to start paying taxes as a non-resident the first year, and then the second year, when you become a tax resident in Spain, as a resident, okay? Here's a case of someone who moved in September 2024. This person arrived to Spain in 2024. In September, following month, will apply for the digital nomad visa, was approved for the DNV in November, and in December registered as autónomo. So this person was working as a digital nomad, let's say working for a foreign company on a remote basis from within Spain, okay, but wasn't really a tax resident that year. And quoting an expert, this person said, for tax questions, if you ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 answers. This is a particularly gray area as you weren't resident until you got your TA card. So you weren't even officially allowed to work, but of course, everyone does. You're supposed to pay tax in the country where you're physically working, which is maybe what you mean by address. So strictly speaking, on any work performed since September. So this person moved in September, second half of the year, spent less than 183 days in Spain in 2024, but still has to pay income tax as a non-resident. And the following year, will have to pay tax as a Spanish tax resident. Now, let's go to different taxes, and not longer speaking specifically about digital nomads, but about anyone else who moves to Spain. These are other taxes that you need to also consider. Inheritance and gift tax. These are paid by the heir or recipient of the assets, and there are different tax reductions and exemptions that vary a lot by region. So again, Madrid and Andalusia are also very favorable regions for inheritance and gift tax. Then there is the transfer tax, Impuesto de Transmisiones Patrimoniales, or ITP. This applies for second-hand property purchases. So new built properties pay a 10% national VAT tax. But if you buy from someone else, it's a second-hand property, let's say, you will pay a transfer tax, which is a regional tax. Therefore, there are variations depending on the regions. The rates will range from 6% to 11% for individuals. And Madrid, again, is the most favorable with 6% only transfer tax for purchasing properties. Andalusia, 7%. But for example, Catalonia is at 10%. And now they raised it to 20% if you are, let's say, a company with many properties, etc. So it is pretty crazy differences that you can have depending on the regions. And they're right, 100% to non-residents. This is a big controversial declarations or statements by Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. We're going to talk about that later on. Then there is the property tax, or Impuesto sobre Bienes Inmuebles, IBI. This is if you're an owner of a property, you have to pay an normally annual-based tax based on the cadastral value of your property, which is very, very cheap compared to American property tax. What I'm hearing is that you pay on an annual basis what you normally pay monthly in the States. So, for example, here is normal to pay for a 100 square meters apartment in Malaga, well, about 300 euros property tax, whereas for the same type of property in the States, you will be paying that on a monthly basis. Both ballpark figures. Then there is the municipal capital gains tax, or plusvalía. which is, of course, the tax on the increase in the property value upon sale. Okay, and this again will vary depending on where that property sale happens. Coming back to the proposal of Prime Minister Mr. Pedro Sanchez, it's a scary statement that he's been doing. So I decided to interview Ainhoa Manero, immigration tax experts from Stern Abogados, and Marco Gonzalez, who is an expert tax lawyer. And you can watch the videos on Spainguru's YouTube channel. But basically what they say is that it is very, very difficult that they pass this law, if not impossible, because it would go against some basic rules in the European Union that would make it impossible for this to pass. So I wouldn't be very concerned about this. And what they're talking about also is only about non-EU passport holders who are also non-residents in Spain. So if you are a non-EU passport holder and you are a resident, this proposal wouldn't be for you. Okay, so this is also important to say it. Now, let's talk about capital gains tax. How can I avoid the Spanish capital gain tax? A lot of people, when they're planning to move to Spain, they decide to sell their houses. In many places where they are selling their houses, many states in the state, you don't have capital gains tax, okay? Or it's lower, much lower than the capital gains tax in Spain that, as we said, may range from 19% to 30%, depending on how much gains you made on the sale of your property. So the best thing you can do is to avoid that capital gains tax by timing the when you would become a Spanish tax resident in Spain. It's important not to be a tax resident in Spain when the sale of the property happens. The best way to do it, you sell your property in December and you move to Spain in January, okay? Because as you know already, the 1st of January, the tax here in Spain restarts. It's a new tax year. So if you become a Spanish tax resident in that year and you sold on the previous year, that is not a taxable event for Spanish tax authorities. Now, if you sell during the same calendar year in which you move to Spain, you have to be careful not to become a tax resident in Spain that calendar year. That is the second case, the second line in this slide. You sell your house in March, for example, you don't go to Spain until July 2nd, because there's only 182 days left during that calendar year. Therefore, you would not become a Spanish tax resident during that year. Of course, there are deductions and allowances for capital gains tax. We're not talking about them. If you're older than 65, if you reinvest the proceeds of your sale, there are different conditions in which you could potentially minimize your capital gains tax or even not having to pay it. But the best way you can do it, the best you can do is just avoiding it altogether by not becoming a tax resident when you sell your property. As we said here, the tax rates for the CGT goes from 19% to 30%, and the progressive tax brackets work the same way as the income tax brackets. Now, another question, retiring in Spain, is your pension taxable? So, if you're a Spanish tax resident, your pension is taxable in Spain. What is the threshold for declaring pensions? If you have a sole income source, 22,000 euros annual threshold, but these are for pensions from Spain. Listen to that. If you have multiple income sources, only 12,000 euros aggregate income and only 1,500 euros from secondary income sources. So the threshold goes down. And if you are receiving a pension from abroad, it will appear as a second payer. So if they're greater than 1,500 euros, a declaration must be made anyways. Okay. Now, this is if you're a Spanish tax resident and you're receiving a foreign pension. The progressive tax rates, as we said, this is ordinary income, and they range from 19% to 47% progressively. Specific rules for the US and UK nationals. And the double taxation agreements more or less work the same way for these two nationalities. The Social Security and private pensions are taxable, but government pensions are exempt in the US case, unless you potentially become a dual citizen holding a Spanish citizenship. This is controversial, and there is not a clear answer. For example, if you're receiving a government pension and you're tax exempt in Spain, and you become a Spanish national, some people say that you lose that right because Spain asks you to renounce your citizenship, and in their eyes, you're not an American anymore. So the double taxation agreement wouldn't apply to you. But This is not clear. I have asked this to professionals, and it is not very clear if that happens. And according to Ainhoa Manero, it wouldn't be the case. You would still be benefiting from the double taxation agreement. Now, for UK nationals, it works more or less the same way. State and private pensions are taxable, but public sector pensions may be also exempt in Spain. The allowances for pensioners for ages 65 to 74 is 6,700 euros annual allowance, and over 75 years of age is 8,100 euros annual allowance. Another question is the taxation of American 401ks and Roth IRAs in Spain. For 401ks taxation in Spain, the distributions are taxed as general income at progressive rates from 19 to 47%. This is the 401ks are traditionally exempt from Modelo 720, reporting and wealth tax, but caution is advised due to evolving interpretations. We're going to talk about that later. For Roth IRAs taxation, investment gains tax as income at progressive rates, up to actually should be 30%, if I'm not wrong. This is a typo that I need to correct. Must be reported on Modelo 720. Okay, this is overseas assets declaration based on the account surrender value as of December 31st, and potentially may be subject to wealth tax with rates varying by region, and solidarity tax, of course. Key considerations, recent rulings, but maybe they shouldn't call them rulings. It's a consulta vinculante. This is when an individual asks the tax authority how they interpret a certain law or a certain rule. And the tax authorities have answered that the IRAs and possibly 401ks would require to be reported in Form 720. So it is advisable to seek professional advice to ensure the compliance and avoid any penalties. And if you want to read more about 401ks, Roth IRAs implications in Spain, I have plenty of blog posts there. You have the QR codes that you can scan with your mobile phones, and you can always send me an email to hello@Spainguru.es so I can send you the links if you want to read them more, or just search Spainguru 401ks or Roth IRAs taxation in Spain, and you can find those articles. Another question that I just added for the presentation of today, this wasn't in the previous presentation 15 days ago. For non-lucrative visa holders, you probably heard that the new Reglamento de Extranjería, or the bylaw regulation of the main law, started to be effective on May 20th, 2025. And they included a minimum stay of 183 days in Spain in order to renew your non-lucrative visa. $1 million question. Do I have to become a tax resident in order to renew my non-lucrative visa? And I'm going to tell you something that no one is telling you. Actually, no, you don't have to become a tax resident in Spain in order to renew your non-lucrative visa. And it's not me who is saying it. I am quoting Ainhoa Manero, expert immigration lawyer from Stern Abogados, immigration lawyers. First of all, the immigration year and the tax year are different things. The immigration year is a natural year. For example, if you enter Spain in June 2025, your immigration year goes from June 2025 to June 2025, okay? And the tax year, as we mentioned before, goes from January 1st to December 31st. So those tax years those types of years, overlap, but are different, okay? So first of all, the requirement of the regulation is immigration year, is a natural year, not a tax year, okay? But second of all, the 183-day minimum stay rule that was added to the new regulation, it is in a regulation. It is not in the main organic law. And the Spanish Supreme Court has ruled that such a requirement is not legally enforceable. Therefore, the previous requirement of 180 days that was in the previous regulation was deleted, but the Congress decided to add a minimum stay of 183 days in Spain to renew an LV, and now there is a Supreme Court saying that a minimum stay cannot be enforced. Okay, so Ainhoa Manero says that this is not enforceable. You don't have to stay 183 days minimum stay in order to renew your non-lucrative visa. And if immigration denies you on this basis, it will be successfully challenged in court. So this is the situation. I have a video about it if you want to hear more about this. This is, I just published it like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It is on Spainguru's YouTube channel, and I highly recommend you watching it because, of course, I know is an immigration lawyer and she explains herself in a better language than I do, but those are the main bullet points I wanted you to have in mind. Now, we're coming into the summary of the presentation, and this is a cheat sheet for Spanish taxes. So I tried to condense everything in one single sheet. First, the tax resident in Spain. Tax residents in Spain, if you stay in Spain for more than 183 days in a calendar year, those days don't need to be consecutive, regardless of your immigration status. Second, key tax obligations, Modelo 720 for your overseas assets reporting, personal income tax on June 30th, wealth and solidarity taxes, regional tax and national tax with different thresholds, special tax regime, the Beckham law, eligibility, especially 99.9% for employees and not contractors, 24% tax rate. 4, taxation of pensions for US and UK nationals. For US pensions, Social Security and private pensions are taxable in Spain, but government pensions may be exempt. Same happens in the UK. Taxation of US investment accounts, 401k, tax as general income with progressive rates at 47%, Roth IRA investment gains tax up to 26%. I think it should be 30%. And the Modelo 720 potentially needs to be reported, the 401ks and Roth IRAs. Then taxation for digital nomads. Employees are subject to Spanish Social Security if employer has no local presence. Otherwise, you need to provide your Social Security certificate or A1. If you're a contractor, then you must register as self-employed, autonomous, and pay Social Security and taxes in Spain. And then additional taxes to have in mind is inheritance and gift tax, property tax, capital gains tax, transfer tax. And we're going to look at deadlines to remember in the next slide. And as I said, Spainguru can help if you need tax advisors, professional tax advisors, and tax planners as well, financial planners. You can find recommended and vetted professionals on Spainguru.es. And here's a calendar with the filing deadlines. Personal income tax, June 30th for previous years. Wealth tax, June 30th as well. Solidarity tax on July 31st, so 1 month after the wealth tax. Form 720 is the earliest in the year, March 31st. Okay, and if you're an autonomo working in Spain, you need to file your income tax and your VAT on a quarterly basis as well. As I mentioned before, you can find immigration expert, tax advisors, and so many more services in Spain, personally vetted by me, but you can use Spainguru for so many other things that are absolutely free. If you want to join more webinars, there's a few coming up. Tomorrow I have the Spanish non-lucrative visa with 5 stars on Trustpilot, and also moving to Spain on June 10th. That you can join today. They're absolutely free, just as this webinar. And if you want to stay in touch with me, my email is hello@spainguru.es. Please join the dedicated Facebook groups, watch the YouTube channel, join the newsletter. All those services are absolutely free, and you can opt out anytime. Remember, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only, and it's not tax or legal advice. Please consult with an experienced tax advisor. And now we can move to the Q&A session. And I'm going to go through the different questions that you may have. And of course, if you haven't done so yet, please leave a review in Trustpilot. You have a button there on the top of the screen, red button in the green bar, that will redirect you to Trustpilot, and it will be extremely helpful for me if you could leave a nice review out there. Thank you so much in advance. And now let's go with the questions. David from Granada. In the US, we have access to income tax software to prepare our tax returns. Is there a tax software in Spain to prepare Spanish taxes? Yes, there is. And actually, I have a referral code with a discount. But unfortunately, this software is not in English. It is very good. I am using it myself. It's called taxdown.es, but it's still not in English, unfortunately. And this is the only software that I know that exists right now in Spain. And it works very, very well. It is very nice. I use it as an autonomous, and and also for my yearly income tax. And you have a gestor that is online. You can ask the person anything. The gestores speak English, okay, all of them. So if you have any questions, you can have a chat and conversation in English. But unfortunately, what is the dashboard is in Spanish. So yeah, this is the situation. If you want to have a referral code, send me an email to hello@spainguru.es, and I will send you a referral code with a discount for this service. Otherwise, normally people use gestores or tax advisors for your taxes. Remember that in Spain, the gestores or tax advisors are not responsible for what you submit. So you have to become still a little bit knowledgeable about what you are submitting as well. Next question. Rona Brax, gmail.com. Thank you for joining today. Does registering as autonomous without spending 183 days qualify as having the main economic or business activity? That's a commonly asked question among digital nomads. And as far as I understand, and as the expert that I quoted in the slide. She was saying that if you ask different experts, they will answer you different things. Okay, and I will put it back here. Yes, for this person who registered as autónomo in December 2024, so the tax year in 2024 hadn't finished when this person registered as autónomo. So I think most of the gestores or tax advisors will tell you that you pay tax as a non-resident, even if you registered in 2024 or at the end of the year as a non-resident. Okay, but after you will be a tax resident. So this would be my answer. Of course, I'm not a tax advisor, and as I said, even the experts have different answers to these questions. Janet, will we receive a copy of the PowerPoint after the presentation? No, I don't send a copy of the PowerPoint. I just upload the recording of the video to YouTube, and you can watch it anytime. David, in the US, we have access to income tax software. Oh, this same question. Let me see. Since the deadline for filing is the end of this month. Okay, this one, David. Since the deadline for filing is at the end of this month, correct? 27 days you have, is an extension to file available. Extension to file for the Spanish authorities. I'm going to search for that. El pago. Yes, you can do it. You can actually file an extension. I never done it. This is why I have to search it. Aplazamiento IRPF. That's what I and here I will send you the link to the Agencia Tributaria for the official information, solicitud de aplazamiento. And yes, you can do it. And I don't know what would happen if there is a cost of doing it, if you have to pay interest on it, but yes, you can. Apparently you can do it. Never done it though. I already presented mine actually at the end of May. So let's go with the next one. More questions. That was the last question actually. So I really appreciate that you joined today. If you can't come up with questions right now, but something comes up later, you can always send me an email to hello@Spainguru.es. Stay in touch. Questions about taxes, question about immigration, or anything about moving to Spain. I will do my best to answer you. I always answer my emails. Sometimes I don't know the answer, but I will at least point you out at the different resources or communities that you can join in order to ask the question. So you will always get something from me, an answer and some resources at the very least if I don't know the answer to your question. So, David, is there a standard deduction? Yes. But what type of income? Here you have the link to the different deductions for the different regions. Okay, of course it's all in Spanish. For Social Security. So, as we said, the deductions for retirees, here, the allowances, right? So from ages 65 to 74 is 6,700 euros, and over 75 is 8,100 euros. These are the allowances, as far as I understand. So when you say Social Security, it's a taxable income in Spain. You can see that someone is typing. I will allow you more time in case you want to ask more things. Deducciones. So in the US, there is also a standard deduction of $12,500 on top of the pension threshold. So is the 6,700 euros the only deduction for pensioners? I'm not sure. Not 100% sure. I would highly recommend you engaging with the tax professional or asking the community for people who are paying taxes on their pensions or social security if they have any other deductions. But this is the general deduction for jubilación in Spain. That's why I wanted the tax software even in Spanish. Yes, actually, this tax software, taxdown.es, it's linked to the Hacienda, okay, to Agencia Tributaria, and you can use it for free until a certain moment. I don't know when they start to charge exactly, but because I had to pay anyways. But basically, you can do how do you say, a fake presentation or submission of your income tax with the Agencia Tributaria, and also you can do it with TaxDown, which is linked to Agencia Tributaria, and you can do it for free. Yes, you can actually calculate the result for free, if you decide to pay for it, or you decide to use it, this is the referral code that you can use. You can copy paste that one, or just ask me on or by email. I can send you the code if you want. But yeah, basically, you can go on to taxdown.es and try to do your declaración de la renta. And also you can use the portal of the AEAT or Agencia Tributaria, and they have also, or you can actually ask for an appointment with in person, and you can go to the Agencia Tributaria in Granada, and they can help you with your declaración de la renta. Yes, also they can do it. But I don't know if they will speak English or not. I have no idea about that, but definitely you can get an appointment with Agencia Tributaria, and they can help you with your declaración de la renta. And as far as I understand, if it's not too complicated, they will actually do it for you. But you are, in the end, the only responsible for what you submit. Yes. Cita borrador declaración de la renta. This is what you need to speak fluent Spanish. That's fantastic, David. I mean, your name is extremely Spanish. But that doesn't mean anything. My name is very Italian. Well, I do speak Italian, but I learned it not because of my origins. I am from Argentina, and in Argentina we don't speak Italian. So here, asistencia en cita a la campaña renta 2024. So now in 2025, you are declaring 2024, right? So cita para la campaña de la renta, and you will need a clave, or certificado electrónico to sign, and then you will get a cita, okay? All right, it's 1 p.m. I'm gonna be leaving now, and I really appreciated that you made it today, that you joined the webinar, you asked questions. I really appreciate it. And I will send you the recording very, very soon. Thank you so much for joining today, and stay in touch. Please leave a review on Trustpilot if you think the information that I shared today is valuable in any way. It really means the world to me. And I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Again, stay in touch. Goodbye.